key did not turn. I tried it twice, the way a man does when he refuses to believe what his own hand is telling him, and then I stood there on the porch I built in the summer of 1979, looking at a brass lock that was not mine. It was a Tuesday. I had been at Dr. Halloran's office that morning for my 6-month checkup, the same one I'd been going to since before Eleanor passed. And I had driven home the same way I always drove home, past the Hendersons' fence line, past the old grain silo that hadn't held grain in 20 years, up the gravel drive that still dipped the same way it had dipped for 4 decades. Christine was sitting on the porch swing when I came up the steps. She had a folder in her lap, blue, the kind you buy at the drugstore for school projects, and she was holding it the way you hold something you've rehearsed handing over. "Walter," she said, "we need to talk." I looked past her at the door, at the lock, at the small brass cylinder that did not belong to this house. "You changed the locks," I said. "Not a question. It's part of the transition," she said. "Derek wanted everything settled before you got back. We didn't want you to have to deal with movers and locksmiths and all of it at once." "Settled," I repeated. She opened the folder. Inside were printed pages, a rental agreement for a place on 5th Street I had never seen, 2 bedrooms, ground floor, no stairs. There was a sticky note on top in Derek's handwriting. "Dad, this is better for you. We'll explain tonight." I did not read the rest of it. I have built houses, additions, barns, half the porches in this county, and I have learned that a man can tell everything he needs to know about a piece of paper by the way someone hands it to him. Christine handed me that folder the way you hand someone a verdict. "Where's my furniture?" I said. "In the garage, temporarily. Derek's renting a truck this weekend to move it to 5th Street. I nodded slowly. I was aware, in some distant way, that I should have been shouting. I had built this house with my own 2 hands, every stud and rafter, while Eleanor brought me sandwiches and told me I was setting the ridge beam crooked, which I was the first time. I had buried her from the front room of this house 18 months ago, her casket resting where the Christmas tree used to stand. And now a woman who had married into this family 9 years ago was telling me my own furniture was in the garage, temporarily. I did not shout. I sat down on the top step instead, the way I used to sit when I was waiting for concrete to cure, and I asked the only question that mattered to me in that moment. "Has Roy gotten back from Florida yet?" Christine blinked. "Roy Castellano?" I don't know. Why does that matter right now?" "It matters," I said, "because Roy was in the room the day I signed whatever it is you think I signed." Something moved behind her eyes then. Quick, gone before I could be sure I'd seen it. She closed the folder. "Walter, the paperwork is already filed. Derek handled all of that with you weeks ago. You signed everything. You were there." "I was there," I agreed. "I remember the table. I remember the coffee going cold. I remember Derek's hand on my shoulder telling me it was just the same form as before, the one updating the trust for the grandkids' college fund." I looked at her. "I don't remember reading the heading at the top of the page, Christine. I was watching my son's face, not the paper." She stood up, smoothing her skirt, the folder pressed against her chest like a shield. "I think you're confused. It's been a long day. Why don't you come inside, Well?" She stopped, looked at the door, the lock that wasn't mine. "Why don't you come to the rental?" she corrected. "And we'll get you settled, and Derek can explain everything tonight when he's back from the shop." I looked at my house. At the porch railing I'd replaced 3 summers ago, after a windstorm, took the old one down. At the kitchen window where Eleanor's recipe box still sat on the sill, where it had sat for 36 years, where I assumed it still sat, unless someone had already decided that belonged in a box marked temporary as well. "I'll wait out here," I said, "until Derek gets home." "Walter, I'll wait out here," I said, again, in the same calm voice I use when a board won't sit right, and shouting at it has never once made it sit right. "And in the meantime, Christine, I'd like you to do me a favor." "What's that?" "Call Derek. Ask him exactly which document I signed at that table. Ask him to read you the title at the top of the page, word for word." I folded my hands in my lap. "I have a feeling neither one of you has actually looked at it since." She didn't answer that. She walked down the steps, got into her car, and pulled out of the driveway faster than the gravel really allows, little stones kicking up behind her tires. I sat on my own porch step, locked out of my own house, and I thought about Eleanor's voice, the way she used to say it when she caught me half asleep over a contract I hadn't finished reading. A house isn't yours because your name is on it, Walt. It's yours because of what you survived in it. I had survived a lot in that house. I intended to survive this too. What I did not yet know, what I would not know for several more days, was that the form Derek had slid in front of me that afternoon at the kitchen table had never been a deed transfer at all, and that the difference between what I'd actually signed and what my son believed I'd signed was about to become the only thing standing between him and a debt he had not told a single member of this family about. 72 hours earlier, none of this had a shape yet. It was just a Saturday dinner, the kind we'd had 100 times, except this one had Christine's good tablecloth on it, the cream-coloured one she only brought out when she wanted something to feel more official than it was. Derek carved the chicken. He's good at that, the way his mother was good at it, quick, clean cuts, no wasted motion. He's good at a lot of things that look like care from a distance. "Dad," he said, not looking up from the cutting board, "Christine and I have been talking about the house." "What about it?" "It's a lot of upkeep. 5 acres. You're 71. We worry about you out there alone, especially since—" He stopped himself before he said her name, the way he'd been stopping himself for 18 months, like saying it might break something in me that was already broken enough. "Since your mother died," I finished for him. "You can say it, son. I say it most mornings myself." He set down the carving knife. "We just think it might be time to simplify things. Put the house and the land into a proper trust arrangement, the way Mom always talked about doing for the grandkids' education. Get everything clean and settled so nobody has to deal with a mess later." It sounded reasonable. That's the thing I keep coming back to, lying awake some nights since. It sounded exactly as reasonable as it was supposed to sound. Christine set a bowl of green beans down a little harder than necessary. "We're not trying to push you out, Walter. We just think a smaller place, something with no stairs, no 5 acres to mow you, would actually be easier on you." "I mow it myself," I said. "Have for 40 years. "You're 71, Derek said again, like the number itself was an argument. I looked at my granddaughter, Maddie, 12 years old, halfway through her potatoes, and pretending very hard not to be listening to any of this. She caught my eye for half a second and looked back down at her plate fast, the way kids do when they've absorbed more of a conversation than the adults realize. "What kind of trust arrangement?" I asked. "Just an amendment," Derek said. "Updating some of the language from when Mom set the original paperwork up, naming the grandkids properly, making sure everything's protected, nothing changes for you. You'd still live there exactly the same. Then why move my furniture into a rental on 5th Street? The table went quiet. Derek's jaw worked once before he answered. That was Christine getting ahead of herself, looking at options, in case, down the road, you ever wanted something smaller. "Nobody's moving anybody anywhere, Dad. I want to be honest about something. I had a feeling, sitting at that table, the kind of feeling a man gets in his hands before a storm, the kind that has nothing to do with weather reports. But Eleanor had been gone 18 months, and I was tired in a way that went past my bones. And Derek was my son, and I had spent 44 years building things for him to stand on. It is a particular kind of exhaustion, doubting the boy you raised. So I let it go. I told myself I'd ask Roy about it, next time he was in town, because Roy notarized half the important paper in this family's history, and he has a memory like a filing cabinet. I told myself there was time. What I did not know that Saturday, what none of us at that cream tablecloth table knew except Derek, was that 3 weeks earlier, the dealership he managed 2 counties over had defaulted on an equipment loan worth more than the value of his own house. I did not know that the bank holding that loan had begun asking pointed questions about collateral. I did not know my son had sat across from a loan officer and mentioned, almost in passing, that his family owned 5 acres and a paid-off farmhouse free and clear. I knew none of that. I only knew that my son would not meet my eyes when he set the carving knife down, and that Christine's good tablecloth felt, that night, less like a kindness and more like a stage being set. After dinner, Maddie helped me carry the dishes to the sink, the way she always does, and while the water ran, she said very quietly, not looking at me, "Grandpa, are you really moving?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart," I told her, which was the truest thing said at that table all evening. She dried a plate, set it down, and said something else, almost too soft to catch over the faucet. "Dad's been on the phone a lot, with some bank guy. He gets quiet when I walk in." I didn't press her. 12-year-olds notice everything and explain almost none of it, and I have learned not to put more weight on a child's observation than it can carry. But I filed it away, the way I file away a board that doesn't sit quite flush, not a crisis yet, just something to check again later, with better light. I drove home that night past the grain silo, past the Hendersons' fence, up the gravel drive, and I let myself in through the front door of the house I built, the lock still mine, still working, still exactly where I'd installed it 20 years before. I had no way of knowing it would be one of the last times that particular key would do that particular job. The signing happened on a Wednesday morning, 4 days before the locks changed, at my own kitchen table, with the coffee Derek had made, too strong the way he always makes it when he's nervous and doesn't know it. He came alone that day, no Christine. I remember being glad of that, in a foolish way. Like his coming alone meant this was still just business between a father and son, nothing more complicated than that. "Roy couldn't make it today," Derek said, setting his folder down on the table between us. "But this is just the same form as before, Dad. The one updating the trust language. We talked about it Saturday." "Where's the notary then?" I asked. Eleanor always said nothing about this house gets signed without a notary in the room. "It doesn't need one for this part," Derek said. "This is just the amendment draft, for you to review and sign off on intent. The actual filing happens later, with Roy, like always. This is just so I can take it to the attorney and get the final paperwork drawn up properly. I want to explain something about that morning, because I have turned it over so many times since that I no longer trust my own memory of exactly how it felt, only what I know to be true about myself. I was not a stupid man that Wednesday. I have read contracts for 40 years, building contracts, supply agreements, the fine print on 100 different jobs. I know how to read a page. But my son set a cup of coffee in front of me, and he sat where he always sat as a boy, doing his homework at that same table. And he said, "It's nothing new, Dad. Just cleaning up Mum's wishes, and somewhere in the part of me that is still, after everything, a father first." I believed him faster than I read the page. He had it open to the signature line already. That's a detail I didn't notice mattering, until much later the folder wasn't handed to me closed, for me to flip through at my own pace. It was already turned to the last page, the pen already uncapped and resting in the fold. "Sign here and here," he said, tapping 2 lines, "and that's it. I'll get it to Roy and the attorney by end of week." I signed where he pointed. Walter J. Bramlett. The same signature I've used since I was 18 years old. The loop's still the same, even if my hand shakes a little more getting into them these days. I did glance at the heading once. I remember that much clearly, because it's the one true thing I can hang on to when I doubt myself. I saw words near the top, amendment and trust, and I saw Eleanor's name, which settled something in me, because if her name was on it, it had to be about her wishes, didn't it? I did not read past those 3 words. I trusted the frame my son had built around the page before I ever looked at it. He gathered the papers fast after that, faster than a man gathers papers he's planning to mail off at his leisure. He kissed the top of my head, the way he's done since he got tall enough to do it, instead of the other way around, and he said, "Thanks, Dad. This is going to make everything so much simpler." I believed that too. It was only after he left, after I'd washed the 2 coffee cups and set them in the drying rack, that I noticed the folder he'd left behind by accident, not the signed original, just a duplicate copy of the cover page, the kind of thing that slips out and gets left when someone is packing up in a hurry. I picked it up to put it somewhere safe for him, glanced at it without really looking, the way you glance at a flyer before you set it on the counter to deal with later. I did not read it that day. I set it on the side table by the door, meaning to give it back to him next time he came by, and I genuinely forgot about it within the hour, the way a man forgets most small things at 71. Certain they'll still be there when he needs them. It would still be there 4 days later, sitting exactly where I'd left it, when the locks on my own front door no longer turned for my key, and I would have no way to walk inside and get it. What I did not understand that Wednesday, and would not understand for days more, was that Derek had never intended to take that paperwork to Roy at all. The form he'd had me sign was real. Eleanor's amendment language was real. Her name was on it for a true and binding reason. But the document required a second signature, a counter-witness, notarized, within 90 days of mine, before any part of it could take legal effect on the trust. Derek knew that requirement. He had read the whole document, start to finish, long before he ever sat across from me with a too-strong cup of coffee. He was not planning to get that second signature from Roy. He was planning, instead, to quietly let the 90 days pass unfiled, to let everyone, me included, believe the trust transfer had already gone through clean, while he used that same window of confusion to negotiate the sale of the house and land to cover a debt none of us yet knew existed. I drove to the hardware store that afternoon for wood screws I didn't urgently need, made small talk with Pete behind the counter about the Reds bullpen, and came home to a house that still, for 4 more days, belonged entirely and legally to me. I spent that first night locked out of my house in my truck, parked in my own driveway, because I'll be damned if I was going to a rental on 5th Street before I'd had a single honest conversation with my son. Derek showed up around 8, headlights washing across the cab, and I watched him sit in his own car for a long moment before he got out. That told me something too. A man who's done nothing wrong walks straight to the door. "Dad," he came up to my window. Christine called me. "What are you doing out here?" "Waiting on you," I said, same as I told her. "You can't sleep in your truck. Come on, let's get you to 5th Street. I'll explain everything." "Explain it here," I said. "I've got nowhere I need to be." He stood there a long moment, hands in his jacket pockets, and something in his face shifted, just slightly, the way a board shifts before it gives. "Dad, the trust amendment went through. The house is properly set up now, the way Mom wanted, for the grandkids. We just thought, with everything settled, it made sense to move forward on the rental, get you somewhere easier." "What was the heading on the page I signed, Derek?" He blinked. "What?" "The page. Wednesday morning. What did it say at the top?" "It said, 'Dad, it was the amendment. You were there. You signed it yourself.'" "I know I signed it. I'm asking you what it said, word for word." He couldn't do it. I watched my son stand in the dark next to my truck and fail to produce, off the top of his head, the exact title of a document he claimed had already been fully executed and filed. A man who reads something carefully remembers its name. A man who's only glanced at the last page, looking for the signature line, remembers nothing but where to point the pen. "I don't have it memorized word for word," he said finally. "Why does that matter? It's filed, Dad. It's done." "Filed with who?" "With it's handled." "Why are you interrogating me like I did something wrong here?" "Because you won't look at me when you answer," I said. And I meant it plainly, the way I'd say a beam was out of level. Not an accusation, an observation. He left, without moving my truck, without unlocking the house, without another word. And I slept that night in the cab, with my jacket for a blanket, 71 years old in my own driveway. And I will tell you, it was not the worst night I've had. Eleanor's funeral was worse. This was just cold. In the morning, I drove to the hardware store, not for screws this time, just to sit and think, where the coffee was free. And Pete wouldn't ask questions. On the way, I stopped and checked the glove box for the registration, because a sheriff's deputy had rolled slow past my truck twice in the night, and I wanted my paperwork in order if he came back around. That's when I found the form, folded in with the registration, and the old insurance card was a single page. The duplicate cover sheet Derek had left behind on my side table 4 days earlier Except I hadn't left it on the side table at all, I realized, sitting there in the truck cab. I'd put it in my jacket pocket that Wednesday afternoon to keep it from blowing off the table when I opened the window, and the jacket had gone into the truck, and the page had gone with it, and I had genuinely, entirely forgotten. I read it properly this time, truly read it, the way I should have read it at my own kitchen table 4 days before. Conditional amendment to the Eleanor R. Bramlett, family choir's counter-signature of designated co-trustee. Within 90 days of execution to take legal effect, I sat in that truck for a long time. Pete came out once to ask if I wanted coffee, and I waved him off without really seeing him. A conditional amendment, not a deed transfer, not a sale authorization. A document that, by its own printed language, did nothing at all, meant nothing at all, unless a second person signed it too, in front of a notary, within 90 days. I did not know yet who the designated co-trustee was. I had a guess, and the guess had a beard and a fishing boat, and was somewhere in the Florida Keys at that exact moment, blissfully unaware that his name was sitting at the center of a fight he hadn't been asked about. I drove past my own house twice that day, once in the morning, once near dusk. Both times, there was a realtor's sign company truck in the driveway, and a man in a polo shirt walking the property line with a clipboard, measuring something, photographing the porch I'd built. The porch where I'd sat 2 nights before, locked out. They were already showing the house, already moving toward a sale, with a document that, if I was reading it right, and I have read enough contracts in my life to know I was reading it right, had no legal force at all. I did not call Derek that night. I did not call Christine. I sat in a motel room on the highway, $6 cheaper than the one 2 towns over, and I called the only number I had any real faith in. It rang 4 times before Roy picked up, his voice crackling faint over what I guessed was bad reception on open water. "Walt? That you? Kind of a strange hour, you all right?" "Roy," I said, "when do you get back from Florida?" "Day after tomorrow." "Why? What's wrong?" "I need you to remember something for me," I said. "Something about Eleanor's trust. And I need you to remember it exactly right, because I think my son's about to sell my house out from under a piece of paper that doesn't actually say what he thinks it says." There was a long pause on the line, just the sound of water against a hull. "Walt," Roy said slowly, "are you talking about the co-trustee amendment? The one Eleanor had me draft up the year before she passed." My hand tightened on the motel phone. "What do you know about it, Roy?" "I know," he said, "that she made me promise something. About watching the paperwork, if anything ever happened to her, and Derek ever tried to move on that house without doing it right." He exhaled, long and slow. "I think it's time I told you what I've been holding on to." Roy got back from Florida smelling of salt and diesel, and he came straight to the motel instead of going home first, a battered leather folder under his arm that looked older than some of the men in this county. We sat at the small table by the window, the kind with a wobbly leg that every motel table in America seems to have, and he set the folder down like it weighed more than it looked. "Eleanor came to see me," he said, "about 14 months before she passed, alone. Didn't tell you, and asked me not to either, not unless it ever became necessary." "Why would she keep something like that from me?" I said, and I heard the hurt in my own voice before I could smooth it down. "Because she wasn't keeping it from you to hurt you, Walt. She was protecting you from having to be the one who doubted your own son before you had any reason to." Roy opened the folder. She'd started noticing things. Derek asking about the property value more than once. Asking, real casual, whether the trust could ever be dissolved or restructured if circumstances changed. She didn't think he was a bad man. She thought he might, someday, under enough pressure, do something foolish. And she wanted a lock on the door that wasn't just a lock. He slid a page across to me. I recognized the format instantly, the same heading I'd read in the cab of my truck 2 nights before. "This amendment does exactly one thing," Roy said. "It requires that any modification to the trust's real property, meaning the house, and the 5 acres be countersigned by a second designated trustee within 90 days of the first signature, notarized, filed with the county. Eleanor named herself as that second trustee originally. After she passed, the named co-trustee defaulted to me, her oldest friend outside the family, because she didn't trust it to default to Derek or to you alone, not because she doubted either of you, but because she knew grief makes people sign things they shouldn't. So when Derek had me sign on Wednesday, he started a 90-day clock, Roy said, for a signature he was never going to get from me, because he didn't want me anywhere near that table. He's hoping to get the sale fully closed before anyone outside this family ever checks whether the amendment was properly executed. Most buyers' attorneys do check title history closely. Some title companies are more thorough than others. He's betting on a fast, sloppy close. I sat with that for a long moment, watching dust move in a thin shaft of motel window light. He doesn't know you have this, I said. He doesn't know I have anything, Roy said. He's 29 years old in his head still. Far as I'm concerned, the boy who used to fall asleep in my fishing boat. I don't think he sat down and decided to be a man who steals from his own father. I think he sat down in a bank office somewhere, scared out of his mind about a debt he hasn't told a soul about. And he made the kind of choice scared men make. One piece at a time, each one small enough to live with until they aren't. What debt? I said. Roy hesitated, then told me what he'd heard second-hand from a fellow notary, 2 counties, over a defaulted equipment loan on Derek's dealership, the bank circling, collateral conversations that had apparently, at some point, drifted toward 5 acres and a paid-off farmhouse that wasn't, strictly, free to offer. I thought of Maddie at the sink, drying plates, telling me her father had been quiet on the phone with some bank guy, 12 years old, and she'd seen the whole shape of it before I had. What happens now? I asked. If they close the sale before the 90 days are up, before anyone checks, then a buyer's attorney has bought into a property with an unresolved trust condition on title, which is a mess that unwinds eventually, but it unwinds slow and ugly, and it'll cost everyone, including you, 2 years in court to sort out. Roy closed the folder. Or, we make sure the title company knows what to look for before that closing ever happens. You do that. Go up against Derek. Roy looked at me steady, the way he's looked at me steady since we were 17 years old, working a hay baler together. I made your wife a promise, Walt. I intend to keep it. But I want to be plain with you about something else too. I'm not doing this to destroy your son. I'm doing it to stop him before he does something to himself he can't undo. There's a difference, and I think before this is over, you're going to need to hold on to that difference real tight. I thought about the recipe box on the kitchen windowsill, and whether it was even still there, or whether it had already been packed into some box marked temporary by a daughter-in-law in a hurry to be done with all of us. There's something else, I said slowly. Eleanor's recipe box. Is there any chance? I don't know, Roy said. But if she went to the trouble of doing all this without telling you, Walt, I wouldn't be surprised if that box has more in it than recipes. We didn't sleep much that night, the 2 of us, going through that folder page by page at a wobbly motel table, while 2 towns over my son believed the hardest part was already behind him. The for sale sign went up on a Friday. I drove past and saw it standing in the front yard, planted in the same patch of grass, where Eleanor used to grow her tomatoes. And for the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt something close to anger, clean and simple. The kind that asks nothing of you, but to be felt for a minute before you set it down again. I set it down again, Derek called that evening, his voice lighter than I'd heard it in months. Dad, listen, I know things have been tense, but I wanted you to hear it from me. We've got a buyer. Regional outfit. Cash offer. They want to close inside 3 weeks. This solves everything. Once it's done, you'll have plenty set aside, the rentals paid through the year, and we can all just move forward. 3 weeks, I said, maybe less. They're motivated. I told them the trust paperwork's already clean. No liens, no complications. Easy close. I let a silence sit there long enough that he eventually said, Dad, you still there? I'm here, I said. Sounds like you've got it handled. After I hung up, I sat with that phrase for a while. No complications. My son had told a buyer's attorney, in writing or close to it, that there were no complications on a trust amendment he himself had never properly filed. I understood, sitting there, that he wasn't lying carelessly. He believed it. He'd convinced himself so thoroughly that the 90-day clock didn't matter, that nobody checks that closely, that Roy was 3 states away and out of the picture, that an old man in a motel room wasn't reading legal documents closely enough to catch it, that the lie had stopped feeling like a lie to him at all. It had just become the plan. Christine moved the rest of my furniture to 5th Street that weekend. I let her. Roy advised it, actually said it was better, for now, to let them believe everything was proceeding exactly as they expected, while we did our own work quietly underneath it. You want them confident, Roy said, over coffee at his kitchen table, maps and old shipping receipts still scattered from his Florida trip. A confident man doesn't double-check his own paperwork. A nervous one does. So I let Christine arrange my recliner in a rental living room I'd never asked for. I let her hang a calendar on the wall, the kind with inspirational quotes about new beginnings, which I found almost funny in a tired way. I drank my coffee on 5th Street and said very little, and Maddie came by once after school, sat with me on the front step of a house that wasn't mine, and asked quietly whether I was okay. I'm going to be fine, sweetheart, I told her, and for the first time in this whole business, I believed it when I said it. Roy, meanwhile, was doing the part of this I couldn't do myself. He'd reached out carefully, through an old friend who worked title research at the county recorder's office, not asking for favors, just asking what a properly filed conditional trust amendment was supposed to look like on record, and whether one matching the Bramlett property had in fact ever been filed. It hadn't, which meant the buyer's title company, whoever they used, would eventually need to search the county trust filings as a routine part of closing. And when they did, they would find an executed amendment with Walter J. Bramlett's signature on it, and no corresponding co-trustee counter-signature anywhere in the county's records, sitting well within its 90-day window. Roy filed his own copy with the county that week, not to block anything outright, just to make certain plainly and on the public record that the real document existed and that its conditions had not been met. A quiet act, no drama to it, just a man putting a true thing where other people would eventually have to look. Now, Roy said, we wait for their closing process to find it on its own, or we make sure it does. Which one? I asked. He thought about it a long moment, looking out his kitchen window at the dark coming down over his own 5 acres, smaller than mine, paid off the same hard way mine had been. I think, he said slowly, your son deserves to hear this from his own family before a stranger at a title company says it to him across a desk. I think you should be the one in that room when it comes out, Walt, not me standing in for you, you. He's not going to want me there. No, Roy agreed. He won't. That's usually how you know you're standing in the right place. The closing was scheduled for the following Thursday, 10 in the morning, at the title company's office above the credit union on Main Street, the same building where Eleanor used to bank for 40 years. Derek had told the buyer's attorney there were no complications. He did not yet know that his father and his father's oldest friend would be sitting in the waiting room when the title officer pulled up the county trust filings on her screen. The title company's office smelled like fresh coffee and new carpet, the kind of room built to make people feel like nothing could possibly go wrong in it. Derek was already there when Roy and I came up the stairs in his good blazer, the one he wears to dealership conventions, shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize the buyer's representative. I'd learn later. A soft-spoken fellow named Patterson who'd driven 2 hours for what he believed was a routine signing. Derek's smile dropped the moment he saw me. Dad, what are you doing here? Same thing you're doing, I said, waiting on the paperwork. Christine was there too, by the window, and she went very still when Roy walked in behind me, the way a deer goes still before it decides which direction to run. The title officer, a woman named Renee with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, gestured us all toward the conference table, unaware she was about to become the most important person in the room. We're just finishing the final title search, she said. Should have everyone signing within the half hour. Derek sat across from me, jaw tight, not meeting my eyes. Dad, I really wish you'd called first. This is a business closing. It's not really. I have every right to be here, I said quietly. It's my name on the trust. Renee's computer made a small chime. She frowned at her screen, scrolled, frowned again. I'm sorry, she said. I'm seeing a recorded amendment on this property from about 5 weeks back. Conditional language requiring a co-trustee counter-signature within 90 days. She looked up. Mr. Bramlett, which one of you is the co-trustee listed here? A Roy Castellano? The room went very quiet. That's me, Roy said. Patterson, the buyer's man, set down his pen slowly, the way you set down something that's just gotten heavier in your hand. I'm sorry, is this amendment filed and unresolved? Because if there's an open condition on title, my client cannot close on this property today. That's a significant issue. There's no issue, Derek said too fast. That's an old draft. It was superseded. The family handled that internally. It's filed with the county, Derek, Roy said, not unkindly, not raising his voice at all. I filed it myself 2 weeks ago because it had never been filed when it should have been. I'm the co-trustee your mother named, son. I never signed anything authorizing this sale because nobody ever asked me to. Derek's face did something I will remember for the rest of my life, not anger first, but something underneath anger, something closer to a held breath, finally letting go. You weren't supposed to, he stopped himself. Supposed to what? I asked, quietly. Not a trap, a real question. He looked at the table for a long moment. Christine's hand had gone to her mouth. Patterson was already gathering his folder, murmuring something about needing to speak with his client before this closing could proceed any further, and Renee was watching all of us with the careful, practiced stillness of a woman who has seen family business come apart in this exact room before. I'm in trouble, Dad, Derek said finally. So quietly I almost didn't catch it. The dealership, the loan. I thought, if the sale just went through clean, I could fix it before anyone ever had to know. Before you ever had to know, and it would just be done, and none of this would matter. How much? I said. He told me. It was a great deal of money. It was not, I noted with a strange, distant clarity, more than this family had survived before. You signed me a document you never read the conditions of, I said, and you were never planning to honor those conditions, because honoring them meant Roy would find out, and Roy finding out meant I would find out. I didn't want you to know I'd failed, Derek said, and his voice cracked on the last word in a way I hadn't heard since he was 9 years old, and broke his arm jumping off the hayloft. I didn't want you looking at me the way you look at a job done wrong. I thought, in that moment, of every beam I'd ever had to tear out and reset, because it was a half-inch off level. I thought of how many times in my life I had told a younger man, on a job site, that the failure isn't the crooked beam, the failure is leaving it crooked, because you're ashamed someone will see you fix it. Son, I said, I have never once in your whole life looked at you the way you think I look at you. Christine had started crying quietly by the window, not performing it, just crying. The way a person cries when a plan they'd convinced themselves was kindness finally shows its true shape to them too. Patterson stood. I'll need to discuss this with my client. Given the unresolved trust condition, we won't be proceeding with closing today. He nodded to Renee, gathered his folder, and left without another word, the easiest, fastest exit of anyone in that room. Renee looked between the four of us, the kind of look a referee gives when a game has stopped being a game. I'll need everyone's signatures just acknowledging today's closing did not proceed, she said gently. Take your time. Roy reached into his leather folder and set one more thing on the table, not for Renee, not for Patterson, who was already gone, for Derek. A single sheet of paper in Eleanor's handwriting, the note Roy had found, folded into the bottom of her recipe box, months after she'd given it to him for safekeeping, before any of this had even begun. Roy, if it ever comes to this, tell my son I always knew he'd be afraid one day of disappointing his father. Tell him his father was never the one he needed to worry about disappointing. He was always going to need to forgive himself first. Derek read it twice. Then he put his face in his hands, right there at the conference table, and for the first time since this whole thing started, he cried like the boy I remembered instead of the man who'd changed my locks. The sale did not go through. It took another 6 weeks of quieter conversations, with the bank holding Derek's dealership loan, with an attorney Roy trusted, who specialized in exactly this kind of family unwinding, with Christine, who came to see me alone one afternoon on 5th Street and sat across from me at a kitchen table that wasn't mine and apologized in a way that didn't ask me to make it easier for her. I told myself it was for your own good, she said. Smaller place, no stairs, less to manage. I think some part of me believed that the whole time, even while we were doing it the wrong way. She looked down at her hands. I don't expect you to forgive that quickly. I just wanted you to hear me say it wasn't only Derek's doing. I went along with it because I wanted out of Carver's Mill, and the house was the easiest thing to blame for staying. I didn't have a clever answer for her. I just told her the truth, which is that forgiveness, in my experience, isn't a door that opens all at once. It's more like a lock that gets a little easier to turn. Each time you actually use the key, instead of just standing in front of it. Derek did not lose the dealership, in the end, though he came close. He sold his own boat, his own truck, took a second loan against equipment he actually owned outright, and worked out a payment arrangement with the bank that cost him most of what pride he had left to give up. He never asked me for the house again. He never asked me for anything at all, for almost 2 months, until one Sunday morning he showed up on my porch, my real porch, the one with my real lock, because I had moved back in the week after the closing, fell apart with a bag of flour and a carton of eggs. Maddie told me, he said, standing on the step where I'd once sat locked out, that you stopped making the biscuits. Mom's recipe. She said you used to make them every week, and you stopped after. I stopped because eating them alone felt like a different kind of locked out, I said. He nodded slowly, like he understood that better than he wanted to. Can I learn how? The recipe. She never taught me, and I never asked, and I don't want it to be too late to ask. I let him in. I got down the recipe box from the windowsill, the same box that had sat, untouched, exactly where I'd left it, because in all their hurry to pack and sell, neither Derek nor Christine had ever once thought to look inside a wooden box of recipe cards for anything that mattered. They hadn't been looking for what was actually valuable. They'd been looking for what was sellable. We made the biscuits together that morning. Me, badly. The first batch, the way Eleanor's first batches with me had always been bad too, 40-some years ago, in a kitchen that didn't have walls yet when we started dreaming about it. Derek's hands shook a little with the dough. So did mine, though, for different reasons. I think often now about that document, the one with Eleanor's name at the top and a 90-day clock running underneath it that nobody but Roy and a dead woman ever fully understood. It would have been easy enough, looking back, to feel like the whole story was about that clock, about catching the technicality, about the missing signature, about the room at the title company, where the truth finally arrived in time. But I don't think that's actually what the story was about. I think the document was only ever Eleanor's way of buying me time to find out something slower and harder to put into a legal filing, whether my son, faced with his own failure, laid bare in front of his father, would run from it or finally stand still long enough to ask for help. He stood still, eventually, late and afraid and ashamed, but he stood still. The house is still mine on paper, in the way paper can make a thing official. But I have come to understand, these last few months, that it was never really the paper that made it mine in any way that mattered. It was Eleanor, 36 years of breakfasts and arguments, and one carved recipe box, deciding that loving this family meant protecting us even from each other, even after she was gone, even when it took the shape of 90 quiet days and a friend in a fishing boat 3 states away. A house isn't yours because your name is on it. It's yours because of what you survived in it, and because of who you let back through the door once the surviving is done. Derek comes for biscuits most Sundays now. He's still learning. The dough is still a little uneven. I let it be uneven. Because some things are better learned slow, by hand, the way I learned to set a ridge beam straight. Only after I'd set one crooked, first with Eleanor watching from the yard, laughing, telling me I had all the time in the world to get it right.